Most people live their entire lives under an illusion. They believe their suffering is caused by what happens to them. A job loss, the end of a relationship, betrayal by a friend, or the collapse of a dream. We assume these events are the true authors of our pain. But what if the reality is far more unsettling? What if the event itself is not what breaks us, but rather the invisible war we wage inside ourselves after it happens? Carl Jung once distilled this truth into a phrase so deceptively simple that many overlook its depth. What you resist persists. He wasn't offering a poetic metaphor. He was exposing a law of the human psyche. The suffering we carry is not born from life's blows, but from our refusal to accept them. Imagine, for a moment, two people who both lose their jobs on the same day. The first collapses under the weight of bitterness, whispering, "This is unfair. I can't survive this. Life shouldn't be like this." Weeks turn into months, and still the wound festers, poisoning their thoughts and darkening every new opportunity. The second person, while equally hurt and uncertain, pauses, breathes, and admits a hard truth. It happened. I can't change that, but I can choose how I respond. That acceptance doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms it into movement, into possibility. This is the cruel paradox of human suffering. We believe clinging, resisting, and fighting reality protects us, when in truth it chains us to misery. Our minds are wired for control, to predict, to stabilize, to bend life to our will. But life is mercilessly indifferent to our preferences. Its rhythm is its own, unpredictable, ungovernable. And so when we resist, when we mutter in anger, "This shouldn't be happening to me," that very resistance becomes the seed of suffering. Consider heartbreak. The raw pain of losing someone is natural. It may last weeks, even months. But the torment that lingers for years, the kind that burns like an echo every time a memory arises, is not the breakup itself. It is the refusal to let go, the desperate clinging to a story that no longer exists, the endless loop of "it should have been different." In truth, it isn't the loss that destroys us. It's our resistance to accepting that the loss has already happened. The same is true for betrayal, failure, or rejection. Events wound us only once. It is our resistance, the replaying of scenes, the rewriting of outcomes, the endless inner protest, that wounds us again and again. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is self-perpetuated. And here lies the first great key: acceptance. Not the weak surrender of resignation, not the blind approval of injustice, but radical acceptance, the courage to stop fighting with reality, to stop pouring energy into a war that cannot be won. Acceptance means turning away from the futile cry of "Why me?" and asking instead, "What now?" When we redirect our energy from resistance toward response, something begins to shift. The heaviness does not vanish overnight, but it starts to lose its grip. Like a fire starved of oxygen, suffering begins to suffocate when we refuse to fuel it with resistance. But this revelation is only the surface of a deeper mystery. For even when we consciously understand the power of acceptance, many of us remain trapped, repeating cycles of pain as though guided by an invisible hand. Why do we keep sabotaging ourselves, falling into the same heartbreaks, repeating the same patterns, reliving the same wounds? To answer that question, we must journey into the hidden realm of the unconscious, the silent architect of our suffering. Radical acceptance is one of those phrases that feels deceptively simple, almost like common sense, and yet few of us ever truly practice it. To accept reality as it is, without judgment, without protest, without demanding that it should be otherwise, is one of the hardest tasks of the human spirit. And here is the crucial distinction. Acceptance is not resignation. It does not mean approving of injustice, excusing cruelty, or pretending pain didn't happen. It doesn't ask you to like what has occurred. Rather, it asks you to stop waging a battle against what is already written, to stop pouring your life force into resisting the irreversible. Think of a man who has just been fired from his job. If he clings to anger and resentment, telling himself for years that the company was unfair, that life betrayed him, he carries the weight of that dismissal into every future workplace. Each new opportunity becomes haunted by the ghost of the past. His identity begins to fuse with bitterness. In contrast, imagine if that same man, after the initial sting, whispers to himself, "It happened. I can't undo it, but I can choose what I do next." That shift doesn't erase the pain, but it reclaims his power. Instead of marinating in resentment, he redirects his energy toward growth, learning, and new beginnings. Acceptance is like opening your hands after years of clenching them into fists. The scars remain, but the tension softens. Energy, once locked in combat with reality, begins to flow again. In this flow, pain becomes a teacher rather than a jailer. Yet here lies a troubling question. If acceptance holds such transformative power, why do so few people embrace it? Why do we instead cling to pain like a badge of identity, replaying old wounds as though keeping them alive protects us from something worse? The answer lies not in our conscious choices, but in something deeper and far more elusive, the unconscious mind. Even when we understand the logic of acceptance, we often find ourselves sabotaged by invisible forces, repeating cycles we swore we'd escape. Carl Jung once warned us, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this is the bridge we now cross. To truly understand why acceptance feels impossible at times, we must look beneath the surface, into the shadowy depths of the psyche where hidden patterns keep us chained to suffering. The unconscious doesn't just resist acceptance, it thrives on familiarity, even if that familiarity is pain. And until we confront it, we will remain trapped, mistaking old wounds for destiny. If resistance is the spark that ignites suffering, then the unconscious mind is the engine that keeps it running. Jung captured this with one of his most haunting insights. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What does this mean? That much of what we call bad luck, destiny, or even God's punishment is often nothing more than the silent machinery of our own programming, repeating the same cycles over and over again. We think we're victims of chance, when in truth we're captives of our own minds. The unconscious mind is like hidden software installed in childhood. We didn't choose it. We didn't design it. It was written quietly, through every moment of neglect, every fragment of love, every fear absorbed in silence. By the time we reach adulthood, this software runs in the background, shaping our choices, our relationships, our reactions. This is why a woman who grew up in a house where love was unreliable may find herself drawn, again and again, to partners who wound her. Not because she consciously desires pain, but because her nervous system has been conditioned to equate instability with intimacy. Familiarity feels safer than the unknown, even if it hurts. To her unconscious mind, that version of love, painful, unpredictable, conditional, feels normal. Or consider the man who self-sabotages every time success is within reach. He procrastinates, lashes out, or withdraws just when his life begins to flourish. On the surface, it looks like carelessness. But beneath, his unconscious whispers, "Remember when you tried before and failed? Remember how rejection felt? Better to ruin it yourself than risk being ruined again." We mistake these repetitions for fate. We throw our hands up and sigh, "Why does this always happen to me? Why do I keep meeting the same kind of person? Why does every good thing fall apart?" But it's not fate, not bad luck, not some cosmic curse. It's our unconscious pulling the strings, dragging us back into the only patterns it knows. This is the cruel paradox. The unconscious doesn't care about our happiness. It only cares about what is familiar. And for many, what is familiar is pain. That's why, even when our conscious minds beg for change, we find ourselves walking in circles, reliving betrayals, repeating heartbreaks, sabotaging joy. This invisible trap keeps us from moving forward. We resist reality on the surface, while deeper within, our own programming ensures that suffering returns in new disguises. To break free, we must do more than accept pain. We must confront the unconscious itself, drag its hidden scripts into the light, and begin rewriting them. Because until we see it clearly, we will keep mistaking repetition for destiny, and life will feel less like a path of growth and more like a curse replayed on an endless loop. Every child is born into the world like a blank page, but before long, the page begins to fill, not with their own handwriting, but with the imprints of the environment they grow up in. Parents, teachers, siblings, and even silence itself leave marks that shape the way the child will understand love, safety, and worth. These early impressions become what Jung called the emotional blueprint, the script that quietly directs much of our adult suffering. Picture a child who learns that affection is unpredictable. One day their parent is warm and attentive, the next cold and distant. Without realizing it, that child begins to believe that love always comes with uncertainty. Years later, as an adult, they find themselves in relationships where closeness feels fragile, where they anxiously cling to partners, terrified of abandonment. They are not choosing badly. They are reenacting the emotional truth they absorbed long ago. Or think of the child who only received praise when they excelled, when they brought home good grades, when they impressed others. For them, love becomes conditional, earned through performance. As an adult, they may become a perfectionist, pushing themselves relentlessly, terrified of failure because deep inside they believe love will vanish if they are anything less than extraordinary. Rejection, humiliation, neglect. Each of these early wounds leaves behind an unconscious scar. And here lies the tragic irony. We often recreate the very pain we swore to escape. The girl humiliated as a child grows into a woman who unconsciously chooses partners who belittle her. The boy abandoned in youth grows into a man who avoids commitment, convinced that leaving first is safer than being left behind. This is why people so often say, "I always end up with the wrong person," or "every job feels the same," or "why do I sabotage myself when things are going well?" It's not random chance. It's the unconscious blueprint, quietly pulling them back into what feels familiar. Jung taught that the shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged parts of ourselves, is often formed in childhood. We bury our wounds, we deny our fears, we suppress our shame. But what we bury does not disappear. It guides us from beneath the surface, ensuring that unless we confront it, we will repeat the same stories over and over again. And here is the hardest truth. As long as we refuse to look inward, we will call these repetitions destiny. We will say, "This is just who I am. This is just how life works." But it isn't fate. It's memory, disguised as identity. The patterns of suffering we carry are not accidents. They are echoes of childhood imprints. To break them, we must be willing to see them, to ask the questions we have long avoided, to shine light into the shadow where our earliest stories still live. Because until then, we are not living freely. We are simply recycling the pain of our past, mistaking old wounds for who we are. The first step in dismantling the unconscious trap is recognition. You cannot escape a prison you refuse to see. And most of us are blind to the bars we grip so tightly. We keep asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" without realizing that the answer is hidden in the question itself. To break free, you must become a detective of your own life, examining not just the events that occur, but the patterns beneath them. Start by asking yourself, what has been the dominant emotion in my life? Is it rejection, betrayal, abandonment, fear? Notice the thread that seems to run through every chapter of your story. Because the emotion that repeats is not random, it's the echo of your blueprint. Next, ask, what kinds of people or situations do I keep attracting? Do your relationships feel eerily similar, even when the faces change? Do your failures repeat the same themes? A loss of trust, a collapse of confidence, a sudden abandonment? These aren't coincidences. They are signals pointing to the hidden script you've been living. And finally, ask the most difficult question of all. What story have I been telling myself about who I am? Perhaps it's, I'm not lovable unless I prove myself. Or, people always leave me. Or, I'm destined to fail. These inner narratives, whispered quietly by the unconscious, shape the reality we experience. They are not truths, but as long as we believe them, they might as well be. Recognition is painful because it forces you to see that much of your suffering has not come from the outside world, but from within you. Yet this is also liberation. Because once you can see the pattern, you are no longer its prisoner. The unconscious loses its power the moment it is dragged into the light. Imagine a person who has always said, "I only attract toxic partners." Once they realize this isn't fate, but a pattern rooted in childhood neglect, they gain a choice. They can pause when they feel the familiar pull towards someone unhealthy, recognize it for what it is, and choose differently. That moment of awareness is the first crack in the cycle. This is why Jung emphasized awareness above all. Until you see it, you cannot change it. But once you recognize it, even the heaviest chains begin to loosen. And yet, even with recognition, there is another force waiting to keep us trapped. A cunning, persuasive voice that insists on holding us to our wounds. This voice is not just unconscious programming. It is the ego, the greatest saboteur of healing. Even when we begin to see our patterns clearly, something inside us resists change. A voice rises, persuasive and relentless, whispering reasons to hold on to the very suffering that is destroying us. That voice is the ego. The ego is not who you truly are. It is a mask, a fragile identity constructed from wounds, fears, and the stories we tell ourselves, yet it is clever. It convinces us that without our pain, we would be nothing. It thrives on conflict, resentment, and the illusion of victimhood. And as long as we listen, we remain trapped. Think of the phrases that echo in your mind. I'm always betrayed. Nothing ever works out for me. Life is unfair, and I'm the victim. Each of these thoughts feels like truth, but in reality, they are the ego's way of keeping you small. The ego clings to wounds because they give it an identity. If you let go of your suffering, the ego fears it will cease to exist. This is why the ego doesn't want you to heal. Healing would strip it of its fuel, so it keeps replaying your old wounds, reminding you of every betrayal, every rejection, every failure. It whispers, "Don't forget what they did to you. Don't forgive. Hold on to your pain. It's who you are." And because these stories feel familiar, we obey them without question. One of the ego's most dangerous tricks is victimhood. When you identify as a victim, you surrender your power to the outside world. You wait for an apology, for justice, for someone else to make it right. But in waiting, you freeze. You stop moving, stop growing, stop evolving. The ego convinces you that you are powerless because as long as you remain powerless, the ego stays alive. Here is the brutal truth. No one is coming to save you. Not the people who hurt you, not the world, not some divine force waiting to swoop in. The only person who can rescue you from your suffering is you. The moment you realize that, the ego trembles, because its greatest weapon, victimhood, begins to crumble. So how do you dismantle the ego? The first step is recognition. See the voice for what it is, not your truth, but a pattern. Observe it like an outsider. When it whispers, "Life is unfair," pause. Watch it. Don't react. Don't fight it. Simply see it. The more you recognize the ego as separate from your true self, the weaker its grip becomes. The second step is to stop feeding it. Every time you retell the story of your pain, every time you rehearse how unfair life has been, you nourish the ego. Ask yourself, does this story empower me or does it keep me weak? If it weakens you, let it go. Starve the ego of its food, and it will begin to die. And finally, do the opposite of what the ego demands. When it urges you to lash out, choose calm. When it begs you to cling to resentment, choose release. When it insists you are powerless, act with intention. In these small rebellions, you reclaim your freedom. The ego thrives on suffering. But the moment you stop feeding it, you begin to remember who you were before the pain, before the mask, before the story. And in that remembering lies the path to true healing. Yet even as we loosen the ego's grip, another paradox awaits us, one that reveals why pain so often intensifies when we try to avoid it. Jung's warning rings true: what you resist persists. To heal, we must turn and face the very thing we've been running from. We are taught from childhood to treat pain as an enemy. Don't cry. Be strong. Don't show weakness. The message is clear: pain must be hidden, denied, or escaped. And so we grow up believing that the only way to survive is to resist suffering at all costs. But here is the paradox: the more you resist pain, the stronger it becomes. Carl Jung understood this with piercing clarity. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, the path to healing does not come from avoiding pain, but by turning toward it, facing it without flinching. Think of pain like a force of nature. When you push against it, it pushes back. Try to bury it, and it grows roots. Ignore it, and it festers in the shadows. That sadness you refuse to feel transforms into chronic anxiety. The grief you suppress hardens into numbness. The anger you deny erupts as sudden, uncontrollable rage. Resisted pain doesn't vanish, it mutates. Imagine someone who has just lost a loved one. If they allow themselves to grieve, to cry, to ache, to feel the weight of absence, the pain, though heavy, will eventually move through them like a storm that passes. But if they suppress their grief, pretending they are fine, the pain burrows deeper. Years later, it resurfaces as depression, bitterness, or unexplained emptiness. The storm they tried to outrun only grew darker. This is why resistance creates suffering. The event hurts once, but the refusal to feel it, to accept it, makes the pain echo endlessly. Every moment spent saying, "This shouldn't have happened," adds another layer of suffering on top of the original wound. So what does radical acceptance of pain look like in practice? It begins with dropping the judgment. Stop asking, "Why am I feeling this way?" or "When will it end?" Pain is not a flaw to be fixed, but an experience to be felt. Sadness, anger, fear, they are not punishments. They are natural human responses. Then bring awareness to the body. Where does the pain live inside you? A tight chest, trembling hands, a lump in the throat? By observing pain in the body instead of spinning stories in the mind, you cut through the ego's drama and meet the pain directly. Finally, breathe into it. Instead of clenching against the emotion, soften. Let the breath move through the discomfort. No effort to fix it, no attempt to make it vanish. Just presence. And in that presence, the monster of pain begins to shrink. Here lies the most liberating truth. Pain is temporary. Nothing lasts forever. Not joy, not sorrow. Every storm ends, every night gives way to dawn. But when you resist pain, you stretch it into permanence, turning a passing storm into a lifetime of suffering. The lesson is simple, though not easy. Stop running. Feel fully. Let the storm pass through you, because when you face pain consciously, it loses its grip. It no longer controls you. Instead, it becomes your teacher. And once we stop resisting pain, something extraordinary becomes possible. Pain doesn't just lose its power, it transforms. It becomes a catalyst for growth, for strength, for wisdom. This is where we step into the ancient art Jung called alchemy, the turning of suffering into gold. For centuries, alchemists sought to turn lead into gold. To most, it was a literal quest, a search for wealth and immortality. But Jung saw something deeper in their work. Alchemy was not about metal, but about the human soul. The lead is our suffering, heavy, dull, seemingly worthless. The gold is what emerges when we allow pain to refine us into something wiser, stronger, more whole. This is the hidden purpose of pain. It is not here to crush you, though it may feel that way. It is here to transform you. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every failure is not merely a wound. It is also an invitation. Pain is the fire that burns away illusions, forcing us to face truths we would otherwise ignore. Think of the strongest people you've ever met, the ones whose presence radiates quiet strength, whose words carry a depth that can't be faked. Did they become that way by avoiding hardship? No. They walked through the fire. They were broken, scarred, tested, and on the other side, they were remade. Their wisdom was not given to them. It was earned in the crucible of suffering. This is what Jung called the dark night of the soul, the period when everything seems lost, when the ground beneath you collapses, when the pain is so unbearable you think you cannot go on. And yet, Jung insisted, this collapse is not punishment. It is initiation. It is life stripping away what no longer serves you, forcing you to evolve. In those moments, the choice is stark. You can let pain close you down, harden you, define you, or you can let it refine you, open you, teach you. Pain can make you bitter, or it can make you brave. It can destroy you, or it can awaken you. But how do you turn pain into power in practical terms? The first step is shifting your mindset. Stop seeing suffering as a curse and start seeing it as a challenge. Life is not asking, why should you suffer? Life is asking, what will you do with this suffering? The second step is rewriting your story. Instead of saying, this pain ruined me, you can say, this pain shaped me. Survivors of betrayal learn the power of intuition. Those abandoned learn the strength of self-reliance. Those who fall to the bottom discover resilience they never imagined. Pain gives gifts, but only if you claim them. The third step is letting pain fuel your purpose. Think of the countless people who turned their greatest wounds into their life's mission. The abandoned child who grows up to foster others. The addict who becomes a healer. The heartbroken who become poets, teachers, visionaries. What once destroyed them becomes the very source of their strength. This is the alchemy of the soul, not escaping pain but transmuting it, turning lead into gold, suffering into wisdom, scar into strength. And once you realize this, something remarkable happens. Pain loses its terror. You no longer fear it because you know it is not here to break you, but to awaken you. And on the other side of that awakening lies individuation, Jung's word for becoming who you truly are, no longer chained by the past, no longer defined by wounds, but whole, complete, unshakable. On the far side of pain lies something few people ever discover: rebirth. The storms you thought would end you become the very winds that carry you forward. The nights you thought would never end give way to a dawn brighter than you imagined. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is the lived reality of those who choose transformation over resistance. Jung called this process individuation, the sacred journey of becoming who you truly are. Not the mask your ego crafted, not the identity your childhood pain carved into you, but the self that existed before the wounds, before the conditioning, before the fear. It is the return to wholeness. Individuation is not about perfection. It is about integration. It is the moment you stop rejecting parts of yourself, the grief, the anger, the shame, and instead accept them as teachers, as companions on your path. You no longer deny the darkness because you see it is part of your light. And here is the liberating truth. Nothing lasts forever. Not joy, not pain. Every storm passes, every season changes. The pain that once seemed eternal becomes a memory, and the suffering you thought defined you becomes a stepping stone toward freedom. The patterns that once enslaved you lose their grip because you no longer resist them, no longer mistake them for fate. Think back to the hardest moment of your life. At the time, it may have felt unbearable, as though the weight would crush you. But you survived. And in surviving, you changed. You are not the same person you were before. The pain reshaped you, sharpened you, awakened you. This is the hidden gift of suffering. It remakes us into something more resilient, more compassionate, more real. The choice now lies before you. Will you let pain continue to define you, chaining you to the past, convincing you that you are a victim of life's cruelty? Or will you use it as a catalyst, transforming wounds into wisdom, sorrow into strength, suffering into power? The truth is simple. You are not your pain. You are not your ego. You are not your past. You are the one who chooses what these experiences will mean. And in that choice lies your freedom. So when life strikes, and it will, remember this. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every failure carries within it a question. Not why me, but what now? If you answer with resistance, you will remain chained. But if you answer with acceptance and transformation, you step into your true power. This is the end of the cycle. The moment suffering dissolves into awakening. The moment you realize that you were never broken, only being remade. So if you are ready to break free, declare it. Let the words become your anchor. I transform my pain into power. Because once you make that decision, the unconscious patterns lose their grip, the ego's voice begins to fade, and the path of individuation opens before you. And on that path, you will no longer live as a victim of what happened to you. You will live as the alchemist of your own life, turning every wound into wisdom, every shadow into light, every ending into a new beginning. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your freedom.